Hello coaches and welcome to this edition of Give and Go Live. My name is David Newberry. I'm the e-learning coordinator and I'm joined by my colleague Ian Barker. Hello Ian.
Hi David, greetings from Kansas City.
Ian, today we have the second in a series of 3 activities looking at combination and transition. Our guest today is Ellis Riley. Ellis is the women's assistant coach at Hastings College in Nebraska. Hello Ellis.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
Great, excellent. So this is our second activity, Ellis. We previously did an unopposed activity to build up to this. So we're now going to take it to the next stage. And we have a situation, as we can see on the screen, where we have 2 teams. Each team has 5 players, as we did previously on the unopposed activity. And this time, though, we have a central cone in the middle of a rectangle. 2 end zones, 1 at each end of the area. They're our target end zones. And we have 4 players starting in each end zone with a target player, a striker in the middle. And the difference here is now we're looking at functional responsibility. So for those coaches not so familiar with the numbering system, we have a number 7 on both teams. That is a right-sided midfield player. We have a number 11 on both teams, which is a left-sided midfield player. A number 9 for a striker, and then we have 2 central midfield players, an 8 and a 10. And the red team are going in this direction, and the blue team is going in that direction. You see on the screen and talk about some of the methods we may use for this second sequence.
Yeah, so we're challenging players here dynamically to think about their movement patterns and the importance that their movement can have within the direction and fluidity of play. So we're challenging players to consider the notion of the third man run, overlapping, underlapping, checking in or interchanging with one another. So for example here, the ball's going to be going into the 9 who may check off into this space. And then we're looking for the 7 to potentially be breaking down alongside the 8 potentially coming underneath. And then the 9 has options. The 9 could play out to the 7, could play down to the 8, and then obviously the 11 may also be making a run wide to receive. So we're working on the imagination of possessing to penetrate through the line from one side to another of the field.
Ian, a lot more complex now that we're moving in with some direction and for the functional responsibilities. Can you elaborate a little bit further?
Yeah, I really like the idea as I maybe start working with, I'm just going to say to start with maybe 11s and 12s. This is my striker. He or she is going to have their back to the play sometimes, trying to bring other players in. My 7 and my 11 are typically my wide players, and then my 8 and 10 are the withdrawn strikers supporting the 9. So I like that notion of functionality starting to be established. And then just to sort of go over again what Ellis said, I think there's some really interesting things here. If this number 9 checks here to receive the ball, then what's the implications for the 7? The 7 could extend the run or the 7 could support. If the 7 supports, then 8 and 10 have different issues, and then maybe 11 stretches. So based on the movement of the 9, it has implications on how the next 4 players support the number 9. So some really interesting things for the coach to explore here.
Excellent. And so let's go to sequence 2 now. Here we go. A lot more complex. The ball's moving, and we've got players moving all over the place. So let me do my best to explain what's happening. So if you remember, the blue team started with the ball in the end zone, played it into the number 9. The number 9 checked off at an angle to provide an option for the player on the ball. That pass is made into the number 9, who then plays a pass backwards to the support player, the 10, who then sprays the ball out to the opposite side, so switches the fields to the right-hand side, where the number 8 is making a run down the right-hand side. And you can see lots of different movement patterns here from our 7, our 11, making overlapping runs. And equally, the reds are doing the same thing. We haven't explored all the way through. So, Ellis, what do you see on this sequence, number 2?
Yeah, so here we're challenging the 7, 8, 10, and 11 to move in a variety of different ways while staying somewhat functional. So, for example, we could have the players that we're challenging them here to think about the benefit of their movement off the ball and not necessarily just the decision on it. So can they vary their movements in transition? That's very important. For example, we see on the red team here, the ball is going in from the 10 to the 9. Can the 9 potentially play the 11 into this space? And then do we have maybe the 8 making that sharp diagonal run on the inside edge with the 11, with the 7 potentially holding the width? And then all of a sudden, we're now transitioning with a variety of movement functions going on within the grid. And as soon as that ball goes out to the 11, maybe he's able or she's able to find the 8 in this central zone, and we're right there going in towards the end zone.
Ian, the ball's flying around here, both ends. What do you see?
Yeah, well, I think what Ellis is getting to here is this is a great slide for a coach to interpret. And then what the coach is looking for is how these things evolve in his or her training session. So when I look here, I look at the number 10 deep of the ball supporting. I look at the wide player 7 maintaining width, but space has been created because the player number 11 has moved inside. And so when 11 moves inside, it creates this beautiful channel for number 8 to run forward. So now we have support behind the ball with 10, and we have support ahead of the ball with 8. That's just one potential interpretation. So I think a coach could appreciate here, you see how your players move, maybe you give them a few ideas, and then they can really start to make some decisions and really open up this session.
Let's go to the final sequence. And one thing that's for sure with this activity, Ellis, is we've got a lot of movement happening. And even though we haven't got at the moment any defenders, one can obviously see how complex and challenging this could be for even a proficient older player, let alone a younger player that's learning combinations for the first time. Here we have the sequence that the Blues are going in this direction, and they've played the ball in to the number 7. After playing the ball in, the number 8 is going to continue the run to get into the end zone, and then the number 9 is going to start and get into a starting position near the cone. And on the other end, we have the Reds that have just penetrated down the left-hand side of their field into the end zone. And again, as that ball's transitioned in, the number 11, number 10, number 7 all have to get in the end zone in order to restart, and then the 9 restarts on the cone. So, Ellis, let's talk about what you see on the final sequence 3.
Sure. So essentially now we're looking for quick transitions into the end zone with all players culminating in the end zone and finishing there. While this happens, so for example, we have the 8 being played in here on that long ball in. The 9 immediately gets back to that cone as quickly as possible while all other players are drifting in to the end zone. And what we could progress to here is we could actually progress to the player that receives the ball. So in this instance, this would be the 8. They now switch roles with the 9, and they transition to becoming the false 9. Now, I know this is a little less functional in terms of position reality, but for the transitional purpose of the exercise, we now would potentially create a little bit more diversity in play and a variety of ideas, because the 8 will now switch roles with the 9. So in this case, the 9 would end up finishing in the end zone, while the 8 would immediately receive the ball in the end zone and make a sprint straight back to the red cone while everybody resets on the end zone, ready to go again.
Now, one of the things, Ellis, I notice coaching players, certainly in the 11, 12, 13-year-old age group, is the tenacity and tendency for these players to always want to play forward. And we've demonstrated here, obviously, a lot of forward play. How would you, without having a defender to force the play backwards, how could you encourage your players to start passing the ball backwards in order to maintain possession and switching the fields?
Yeah. So in this instance, what I would like to encourage, when the highest player, so in this instance, the 9, when they do come back to the middle cone, I would encourage them to make a U around the cone, which essentially means that they're receiving the ball with their back to goal. So the initial pass that does come forward from the end zone should hopefully encourage a second pass that comes a little deeper and is potentially dropped back, whether that's a layoff or a straight back pass. we can always kind of encourage the one right there. And then alongside that, I think players just need to be a little bit more aware of their movement. So if that ball goes into the 9, let's just say the ball goes into the 9 here, could this 7 be coming immediately underneath into this space? And then we've got a drop pass there. All right. So I think the layoffs and the little drop-offs can be very easily included in this, but communication has to be very clear in order for that to happen, because the players have to keep their eyes up. They've got to be aware of their visual surroundings, because obviously there is the blue team working within the same grid.
Excellent. And Ian, in this activity, certainly to encourage the players to play forward, we can give them a time limit to get from one end to the other. Equally, we can encourage possession by adding a minimum number of passes between the team. Any other thoughts and ideas for this activity?
Yeah, there's a lot of good ways to make this energetic. So it could be essentially as a time consideration. It could be a race. So how many balls can you get into the end zone legitimately in a certain period of time, and then there's a score. So you can make this competitive even though there's no defenders. You could also consider making the front of the end zone the last defender. So essentially you now can even introduce the concept of offside in this particular activity. And what I really like, and those people that have listened to Give and Go before, and Ellis has captured it really well, is right now, he's got the number 9 always returning to be the trigger for the activity. But Ellis has also suggested that it could be the kid that receives the ball, then he or she to be the players.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ellis and Ian, for your time today. And thank you, coaches, for joining us on this edition of Give and Go Live.